Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of South Sudan in the World. I'm your host, called Doc, and today we have a remarkable guest joining us. She's a commentator, an activist, and an MPH student with a passion for driving change and advocating for social justice. She can be seen in Juba, Nairobi, in UK, and in the Netherlands. Please help me to welcome Adhieu Majok. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much, Carl. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. You wear many hats and you do a lot of different things, from commentating to being an activist to being a scientist. Can you tell us a bit about your journey and what drives your passion for social change?
I think it comes from my experience as a South Sudanese who was born and raised in the Netherlands to political refugee parents who had fled the then Sudan in the 1980s. And my parents were very political. They did a lot of campaigning on behalf of the movement back then, especially in Europe, traveling to places like Brussels and Germany. And because of that kind of like political stance that my parents had, I feel like I've absorbed a lot of it as well. I have been raised in a very political household where there was so being, Southern Sudanese at the time. And so parents have instilled in me, and that's something that I've carried on my journey. And I think that pretty much explains why I'm also an activist in addition to commentating, because politics is also really interesting to me.
Okay, so tell us briefly about your childhood, your upbringing. How did you end up in Europe? Were you born there or were you born in South Sudan?
So my parents, they left. So my father used to be a senator in the 1970s government of Bellalier. So he was actually the senator for Riangnom, or like Tonj East area. So that obviously brought a lot of issues as well, like after the government collapsed. So my parents ended up being political refugees. They fled to Russia, and from then on, they went on to Germany, and then eventually they settled in the Netherlands in the early 1990s. And that's where I was born, and that's where I lived until 2004. And of me leaving was to acquire British education and also British language. But my childhood was a really good childhood. My parents really tried their best. Being political refugees, leaving a life kind of privilege where, my mom was a social worker at the time. She had a diploma in social work. So they started doing, manual jobs. And so I have high respect for my parents. They really started from pretty much the bottom, and they gave me and my siblings as much as they could. And I'm really grateful for my childhood, and something that I believe that, has given me the level of privilege that I have now. And so that's kind of my childhood, my early childhood, and then moving to the UK, went to school, started my degree as well, my first degree, my bachelor's degree in 2010. So I feel like my childhood was really instrumental in shaping who I am, and I had a really good childhood, which I'm grateful for.
Okay, and how was your academic journey when you went to the UK? Did you know the English language? Because I know in the Netherlands they speak Dutch. How was your adjustment?
So in the Netherlands, I was actually struggling with school. I didn't perform really well in school. I had difficulties with mathematics. I had difficulties with language. I used to have language therapy. So I had a lot of issues when I was actually in school. I wasn't doing really well. And that's pretty much one of the reasons why my parents decided for us to move. But when I came to the UK, English was not a problem. I actually excelled really well. I did the General Secondary School Certificate for Education, so GCSEs for secondary school. I did statistics. I did well in maths. I did well in literature, any like English-based
great.
topic, history, literature. I also did German GCSE, and I also did Dutch GCSE. So I actually really like excelled in school, which was really odd because considering like I wasn't doing well in primary school at all.
Okay, so now you speak English, Dutch, and German.
A bit of German, but Dutch is still there. I have my cousin coming over from Netherlands from time to time, and it's strange that we can still have conversations in Dutch, even though I left in 2004. So that's quite a while ago, but yeah, I'm still able to speak.
Okay, that's so impressive. And so you finished your bachelor's, and how did you get into the activism work? How did you did you start saying, I want to be part of social change?
I started blogging, I think 2010 or 2011. So I think after independence, I started blogging. I started my website. So I started with modernamite.blogspot.co.uk. And with that, I was just writing about different issues to do with South Sudan, and in particularly politics, addressing issues like corruption and peace. But at the time, I didn't know that much about the country. My first time ever visiting South Sudan was 2013, and that's also when the war broke out. So that was the first time that I had actually experienced South Sudan and also experienced warfare. And that really propelled me into activism. So things like tracking hate speech for Defy Hate Now at the time. Also things like commentating a lot on Twitter, because there was a lot of there was inaccuracies, there was disinformation, there was a lot of hate speech. So Twitter at the time, now X, was a really, really big driving force for my activism, and then Facebook as well, but definitely Twitter. And that's basically where it stems from. And finishing my bachelor's, I had a really big gap between my bachelor's and my microbiology master's in 2016. So then I got involved in many different activities to do with South Sudan, and particularly peace building and so forth, and writing a lot for different media outlets. I also participated in Talk of Juba. I did a lot of editing for them, and I also did editing and writing news for other platforms.
Yeah, that's how I remember you were in Talk of Juba. You are also with TEDx. You've written.
Yes,
What?
so that's a funny one. So that was TEDx Youth Croydon. So Croydon is a borough in south of London. And I did social media work for them. So I did it for 2 years, I think from 2012 till 2014. And it was really fun. So I did their social media. And it was like the stream, like we were also streaming. We were on Twitter, we were on Facebook, and it became one of the most popular TEDx Youth at the time. So that's how I gained a lot of social media skills.
Yeah, because I remember the first time we communicated, I wrote something for TEDx, and you reached out and I sent it to you. Then that's how I remember it. That it was TEDx Unison or something like that. And so I remember because you knew a lot of people there, and you were also part of YALI. You were very active with that. Tell us about that.
So I had this ambition. So after my bachelor's, after my master's 2016, I was not interested so much in microbiology or science anymore. I really wanted to relocate to South Sudan. I really wanted to be settled and get something done there. And then, I found the YALI program, which I thought would be really beneficial, especially in terms of the public administration side of it. And I applied first try, and I got it. So at the time I spent, I think, maybe a couple of months in South Sudan. I think maybe about 2 or 3 months. And then I had applied for it as well. And then I did YALI. And it was incredible, actually. It's a really good experience. And I encourage any South Sudanese to try and apply for it. I mean, since doing that in 2018, a lot of South Sudanese have gone on board with YALI. And I think it's amazing to see, because they really do give you really good leadership skills and networking as well. And they really keep the community and the alumni community together.
Okay, and I think with that, it also gives you the ability to connect with other people within the continent who are doing similar work to you and sharing ideas, and to realize that there's so much overlapping of issues between South Sudan and other countries in Africa.
Definitely. I think networking is really instrumental. I mean, networking is where I got to where I am today. I network with people through several programs. So I also did CXC, which is Change Make Exchange, which is part of the Bosch alumni network. So with that, again, I connected with people and collaborated with people. And then there's in addition to YALI, there's also other activities. Like in my community, I was doing a lot of grassroots activities. So you get a way of connecting with people, not only within South Sudan, but also outside of South Sudan. And I can say I have a big network of people that I can rely on, that I can ask questions from, that I can get networks from. And especially with UNGSP, I also managed to do that also through my education. I mean, I think that's really important to realize, any opportunity where you encounter people is basically a chance for you to network, and you never know where that can get you.
And that's one aspect a lot of our youth don't see. You're in a very sensitive field. And one thing people respect you for, even myself, I respect you for, is your ability to discuss pressing issues. What are some of strategies that you employ to engage communities and create dialogue about some of the most sensitive issues facing the society?
I have to admit that this has basically been a journey, so it's not something that I've always been able to do, especially in my early 20s. It was really difficult for me to communicate without taking things personal and without getting emotional. So I honestly think it's something that has come with growth and come with time. I feel like though I'm trying to keep my personal life as private as possible, I feel like at the same time, people view me as a public figure. And so with that territory comes the responsibility of communicating in a manner that everyone understands, and in a manner that is, receptive to people. So not in a very emotional manner, but just in a factual way. And I think also me as a scientist from a scientific background, I feel like it's really important for me to always try and keep to the facts and try and keep to reality, and not so much make it about emotions and feeling that much. Though still emotion is really important, because obviously I do consider myself a feminist activist. And so with that regard, it's also really important sometimes it's important to pull at people's heartstrings, but at the same time, communicating, I think it's a skill. It's something that you learn. I've had a lot of also like public speaking experiences, university, television, all those kind of things. And I think that really shapes how you have to communicate with people.
But when dealing with issues in South Sudan, there's always that elephant in the room of you're a woman, you're a girl. Why are you discussing these issues and why are you discussing them so confidently? Do you face that type of backlash and how do you deal with it?
That backlash will always be there, but I feel like it really depends on the topic. So if it's like politics, as long as it's not so much gendered, I don't feel like I get that much backlash. I mean, obviously there is the aspect that we have a very patriarchal society. There's a lot of misogyny that's rooted within our own culture, cultural practice, and even within our social rules. So that is always kind of there. And especially it especially comes out when I discuss gender sensitive issues, like cultural issues, maybe some political issues in such as gender quota or something like that. And then people saying like, women should not just be appointed because they're just women, and which is something I agree with, but it really depends on the topic. I think times are changing as well within our community. I mean, still, yes, there is the aspect of misogyny, there is the aspect of, oh, you're a woman, but I feel like society is trying to celebrate women a bit more. There's still this belief that if you're educated and independent, you will overrule or overpower your husband, you will not do enough for your in-laws. Empowering women and enjoying the fact that women are becoming more independent and getting education. I mean, I definitely see that in my family. Women in my family have always had a choice. They've always done something. They've always been very productive. Like my mother, there's aspects that she's participated in during the liberation struggle. Same thing with my grandmother. So in my family, it's always been normal for women to have a voice, for women to be strong, to be independent, to be self-sufficient. And I feel like maybe other communities are definitely catching up with that as well, like maybe other families rather.
Because I think with that, there's many people are starting to see the role women can play within their societies. You have people who do have a traditionalist view of patriarchy or the role of women. And sometimes when I see on your social media, there's some women who also want to defend the patriarchy. They're like, oh, you can't ruffle feathers. You can't try to incite for this. But then there's people who see the value in it. When you have women who are active, women who play a role in the family besides just being maids and giving birth, you enhance the family. I mean, it's like what you discuss, people discuss in the West, a two income household when both people are working, it enhances the family. And I think these conversations are really changing the game because you're starting to see a lot of dynamic young women starting to be very active saying that we don't want positions because we're women. We're actually qualified. We have what it takes. We've been preparing ourselves. And people who are open to that, people who are more liberal minded and see the value in that, they accept it. But then there's people who also believe in protecting the old school mindset. And I find it so interesting is that you'll find people within our generation, younger than us, who want to protect that old school mentality. You even find women as well, young women and men, who they believe that protecting that is a way of instilling order. Like, how do you see that, where you have younger generation people trying to protect the older way of thinking?
I mean, I think it's still going to be there because, us as a society, as South Sudanese, we have to also, I think, be mindful of the fact that, the concept of education is very new to our community. I mean, we had a very first female South Sudanese graduate, I believe, in the 1970s, 80s, Victoria Yara Roll. So education is really like new in our community. And I feel like a lot of our cultural practices are still being practiced, particularly at the grassroots level. So I think everything comes with time. And even the fact that education is now being seen as something that can benefit society, because, during my father's era, people were asking, why are you going to school kind of thing, and education is just for the elite and education is just for children of chiefs and government people, etc. But now I think people are trying to see oh yeah, education is beneficial. I would like for you to take my child to school and things like that. So I feel like it's something that will come with time. There will always be people that will protect systems and structures that have always been there. I think either because of approval or community or group thinking, or because they feel like they benefit from that system. So some women may feel like they benefit from patriarchy, even though patriarchy is damaging to both women and men. So I think it's something that will come with time. And it's really interesting to see because I feel like a lot of opinions are changing, and especially with the advent of social media and globalization, and people are traveling, and there's a lot of influence from media and from other countries. I feel like a lot of people in our country are changing, but then there's still the aspect of culture being the main determinant and influencer of their thoughts, their beliefs, or their actions. So I think it's something that will change with time.
Yes, and I think part of it also is the exposure of to ideas, because one thing, like I tell people all the time, they always say, well, social media has allowed quote unquote idiots to just say what they want to say. I respond, I'm like, yeah, but those idiots now have to publicly back their stupid arguments. Because if you write something very problematic on social media, you have to defend that argument. You have to bring facts. So what it does is honing a lot of the arguments. And you see this a lot with some of these conversations on social media. Somebody says something really problematic. People are going to have them. They'll say people are going to drag them like, this is wrong. You shouldn't be thinking like this. And they won't get buy-in. So social media has forced people to rethink some of their own ideas, some of their own theories and approaches, and realize that they don't even believe in some of those ideas and approaches. And they can have a sense of negativity, a sense of feeling, but eventually they're going to be forced to accept like, this is not it. And I think this is a good, because with some of the many issues facing South Sudan, especially if we saw from 2013 with the conflict, you saw a lot of very toxic and harsh conversations. But at first it was hard, but I feel like we made breakthrough, because now those conversations are easy to be discussed. People are more comfortable discussing them and then discussing them openly. Like, this is what we need to do. This is my approach. And things are not just so much black and white. And with many of the issues, besides the feminism, activism, what are other issues that you're currently focused on?
I think you made a very good point. I actually completely agree with you. I think at the moment, I'm just trying to find what is going to be my main focus. I mean, earlier on, you mentioned I wear many hats, and it's true. And it's something that people criticize me for. But I always say, like, if you're good at doing many different things, like why would you stop doing them, you know? So for me, my focus really, like, at the moment is my master's in public health, trying my best in that, and then progressing onwards in public health, because I'm no longer interested in microbiology. It's just, the lab work aspect is just too much for me. I feel like I prefer to be around people and doing something that will benefit community and society in general. So for me, really, I'm going to be focused on healthcare, and especially healthcare systems and healthcare inequalities. And it's something that I can do both in Europe and in Global South, particularly East Africa. So healthcare inequalities, how it affects, let's say, Black, Indigenous, Asian, and other minority ethnic people, and how it affects also, sexual and gender minority people. So that's kind of where I want to focus on. I want to really find a place to focus on. I will still be an activist, but my profession, I really want to focus on health systems and health inequalities.
Mm-hmm. And what are some public health issues that you think need to be addressed? I've been seeing you writing a lot about issues like HIV/AIDS, hepatitis, and those things. Were those some of the things that you want to focus on?
Within the context of South Sudan, hepatitis and HIV are really, really big issues. But I think that's another major issue that a lot of people don't look into, and that's the issue of climate change and how that affects a negative impact. Weather patterns have really affected communities, even things like farming. I know you're a farmer, so maybe you can go into this, but things like farming has become very difficult in some communities, South Sudan, because the weather is just not the same anymore. The rainy and the dry season have completely shifted. So definitely the aspect of climate change and how that affects healthcare and also healthcare access, not just for women, but also for men. So if there's a lot of natural disasters and so forth, then that affects access to healthcare in communities that already have limited access to healthcare. So for me, it's definitely to do with climate change and how that affects healthcare. Also healthcare outcomes, because climate change, the weather changes, and weather change can also have an impact on health. So yeah, for me, it's definitely that aspect of it.
And I think you make a good point. Like, I'll add on to this. One thing about climate change people don't understand is that did like an interview with RT World, and I talked about this, how the biggest people impacted by climate change by far is the African continent. And the least emitters of climate change are the African continent. And so the conversation with climate change has been mostly about, okay, they need to cut emissions, they need to stop producing that. I said, no, look at the impact of it and mitigate those impacts. And so some of the challenge with even farming is that the rain schedules have been different. Sometimes the rain schedules delays, sometimes there are more. And one thing people don't understand is they say, okay, well, this year it rained a lot than we've ever had before. That means there's no climate change. I'm like, but that's part of it. It's the changing of the cycle. So this year you can have good rains. But then again, when there's a lot of rains, people say this is the most rain we've had since 1940 something. some seasons you'll have a drought, and somebody say we haven't had a drought to this level since my great grandfathers. I'm like, wait a second, you guys are admitting that this is abnormal. You're not saying it like, oh, this happened 5 years ago. You're going as far back as saying like, yeah, there was a song that they recited our grandfathers about. There's a season where there's no rains or the rains came early. This is affecting yields. And on top of that, there's yields. People are not producing as much as they used to before. These are issues. And so when you go to places in South Sudan where you're like, you guys haven't even been cultivating this ground that much, but you're being impacted by something that's been affecting the whole world. And I think that's an aspect people don't look at. But could you share to listeners with climate change who don't understand, how can this impact South Sudan and East Africa? And what can be done about it?
I mean, you made a really good point there. The global south is the least emitter, but we are the most affected. I mean, I'm not an expert on climate change or global warming, but definitely the impact, we can already see it. I mean, you've given examples of it. I think one of the things that is lacking really is action. I think it's also very difficult in the context of our country to have effective action as well, because with the crisis happening in North Sudan and with how many people have fled to South Sudan, it's very difficult for efforts to be focused on that when efforts has to focus on humanitarian assistance. So I think action is something that's lacking, but not just action from our governments maybe, or even organizations within South Sudan. I think actions is lacking globally, especially from higher income countries that emit the most greenhouse gases. So I think that's really where it lies. And I don't know that much about what happened at COP28 and so forth, but I feel like that industries and governments in the West and other countries are not doing enough. That's basically where the main issue is. I also think there needs to be room for education on climate change and the effects of climate change on communities, especially within our country, because now, some people, they don't understand the impacts of it. And then maybe issues like farming or agriculture, like how can we adapt our farming and agricultural practices to ensure that, yes, this is happening right now, but what can we do better, or what can we change in order for us to, be able to still farm and still feed ourselves and still feed our community despite the climate changing. So I think those are the things that need to be explored, and maybe they're being looked into, just having innovative solutions that will help our communities.
Yes, yes. And I think that's one of the things that people can start having discussions about and educating them about. Would be good. Now, you mentioned something so interesting I'd want to get into. You spoke about how you have your degree in microbiology, but as you've gone in your career, you're starting to see that you want to do something else. Now you're getting your master's in public health, and you've identified how your goals that you've identified now and the things you want to do now interline. What do you say to people who believe that I studied this, I have to stick by this? Because you basically admitted like, hey, you know what? I studied this. I don't want to do it. I want to do something else, and I'm going to go do it. Many people are rigid. They're like, oh no, I studied chemistry. I have to be a chemist. This is what I studied. That takes courage to be like, hey, I don't want to study this. I want to do something else. I don't want to do microbiology. How did you make that decision? What do you say to people who are hesitant to make such decisions?
I think you make a really good point. This rigidness that people have, especially within our country, it's something that I've not experienced. It's something that I have not really seen in the UK. Like, I know people who've done English literature and they're working in HR. I know people who studied law and they became doctors. So, like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but I think within the United Kingdom, for example, there's not like so much focus on, if I do this degree, then I have to stick with this. I think people are trying to diversify their skills and trying to diversify their knowledge, because the labor market keeps changing, and especially with the advent of AI, like, we have to keep up with it. I went really far with my microbiology degree. I had a research paper published in Elsevier. I contributed to that. It's something that I'm really proud of, but I felt like my passion was not in it. And I also had another opportunity to actually do a doctorate at the University of Birmingham, again, focusing on the same topics around microbiology. But I just felt like, if my heart is not in it, then why do you have to do that? So I took some time out, and then I started, focusing a lot more on my activism, on commentating, and, doing a lot more in South Sudan and being a lot more in South Sudan. And that's where I started getting after 2021. So I was there doing some peace activism. And then also, like, we had a really big conference, Tonj Peace Conference in 2021. And then I had a really deep think. I'm like, okay, so it seems like I like politics, I like policy. What can I do that doesn't stray so far away from my background? so that I don't have to start all over again, like with a bachelor's degree. And public health is the first thing that I thought of. So for me, it's really like, yes, you have to be brave to change maybe educational plans, future plans, or career plans. But it's something that a lot of people have done before. And it's something that you'll thank yourself for, because there's nothing like doing what you love and doing what you're interested in. I mean, I'm excelling because I really enjoy the topics that I look at. I just finished global women's health and I really enjoyed that. I just finished health policy last year and I really enjoyed that. So it's really about just following your passions and not what society thinks you should do.
Don't listen to what society thinks you should do. You have an interesting story. With all of this, you have a family. Many people will say, well, if I have a family, I can't do what I want to do. It's going to inhibit me from doing what I want to do. You're changing your field. You're doing all this. How do you juggle all that in your family? How do you juggle your career and your family?
It takes a lot of commitment and energy. I mean, even I thought like if I get married and, I have a family, I cannot do anything. But I think the number one thing for me is family support. So my husband has always been very encouraging. He always wants me to do more. And he absolutely supports everything that I do. So that's number one, just being on the same page, because he's also studying, he's training to be a surgeon. So he's also really busy and occupied with his things. And I'm also busy and occupied with my things. And I think for me, the second one is just my mom. Like, it's really just really simple. It's my mother. My mother, she established a business in 2010, and that's the business where I work at. And that has allowed me a level of flexibility and support that I know it's a level of privilege that not many people have. And it's something that I completely recognize as instrumental, because she has a successful business, she's able to work remotely, she's able to help me with childcare. So for example, if I have to go to the office and I have to work, or for example, if I have to travel somewhere, if I have to put in an assignment, my mother is there, my sister is there, I have cousins as well. They all help with childcare where necessary. And I think that's important, but also having balance is important. So I have days where I don't work. That I have days where I take my son like to play group. I have days where I take him out for walks. And then I have days where it's just completely about work and study. So I think balance is really important, and having a really good support network.
And I think many of the times, for me, like, I'm married, I work, my wife works, and I remember sometimes when we'd be on a Twitter space, like, okay, you give me guys 5 minutes, I want to put, my son to bed. And it's like, I was like, dang, because it's like now, like having a daughter, having a wife, I realize when you have a lot going on, you're more organized than when you have nothing going on. Because now when I go to work, I have to get my things done because I got to go home and, there's a child at home waiting for me. Or when I'm organizing my schedule, and it's so unique how indirectly you become more organized. That's one aspect I've learned. And so many of the times you have people who believe, there's people believe that I have to select my career. I have to select one thing that I do. And you have a unique story because you wear all these hats and you have a family. There's people just are very singular to say, I have to just do this one thing. That's it. I can't be involved in anything else. I don't want to get married. I don't need a family. What would you say to people who are coming up who want to do all these things? How should they juggle them? They want to have a family. They want to pursue different things, and they want to pursue their passions.
What's funny is that I'm actually like smiling because the example that you gave about the Twitter/X space is absolutely true. Like, then the example about you become more organized, and that's literally what happened. Like, before I had my family, before I had these commitments, I was just doing what I wanted to do. I could get up anytime, I could do anything, I could just work and maybe carry over the work into the weekend. Like, I could just do things as relaxed as possible. And I don't really, well, except for the deadlines that are there, I was just free to do whatever I wanted to do. But as you said, when you get that responsibility, when you get that family, becoming organized just becomes part of it, because your family needs a routine. Your child needs a routine. I think, with your daughter, for example, you have a routine for her. So like, having a routine is the number one thing. Like, having a routine for your child and having your own routine and having your own space as well. So I think that makes you really organized, because I know, for example, one of the days that I go to work, I go to my day job office. I go there on Saturdays. Why? It's nice and quiet. nice and quiet, and I'm able to do a lot of work in a really short time. And sometimes I tell myself I cannot go home yet until I finish this role. So for me, it's about being organized. It's about having a routine for yourself and having a routine for your family. And that's when everything falls into place. At the same time, you have to take on what you can take on. So for example, there are sacrifices that I'm making. I'm supposed to take 2 units, for example. For this coming semester, I've decided to just take one unit because I have other commitments that came up. My role at Bosch Alumni Network as coordinator for East Africa, I had to give up that role after 6 months because I couldn't commit so much to it. So there are drawbacks, and you have to make some sacrifices, either for yourself, either other roles that you're holding. You have to give something up. But the most important that's there, you have to take care of that, which is family, and then also your day job and your main passion. So being organized is number one.
And I think I've realized that you say something very good earlier about how forge your own path, don't listen to others. And so for my listeners, listen to this person. They wear many hats. They decided that what they study for their bachelor's, they publish a research paper like that's not what I want to do. I'm going to do something else. They have a family, they work, and they make sacrifices. And I feel like practically people don't hear those things where I have to take on less roles. Hey, I'm part of this thing. I can't be part of that thing. I'm sorry, guys, because I can't just commit to it because I have a schedule. Whereas when you're not married, don't have a lot of work, you take on every role. Hey, I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll do that. And I think one aspect is practicality, being honest with yourself. And I realized that you've had many honest conversations with yourself, and you've talked about this throughout this discussion. Where when you were in the peace conference in Tonj, you're like, wait a second, I'm involved in political stuff and activism and public health stuff. I didn't even study this. Maybe I should go this path because something inside of you called. And I would say you listen to your instinct, you listen to your passion, and that in return gives you a sense of peace because you're like, this is something I actually enjoy doing. And you have to just accept like what I wanted to do is not what I'm studying, or what I want to do is not what I study, but now I'm making that change. What inspiration would you say to people who are juggling with that now, who are listening, who may have had the same thoughts as you, but just didn't go for it? What would you say to them who are fearful to take that dive?
Again, it really just goes back to what we've discussed earlier and even what you've just said now. I think the most important thing is that you have to just really be sure about what you want to do. And you also have to have a plan, I think. I mean, quitting a job because you want to do a business, for example, or you want to study something else, you have to have a plan in place for everything. You have to have a plan A, you have to have a plan B, and maybe even a plan C. So you have to have the resources to do it. You have the time to do it. So even if it means organizing within the time that you have now, and also that you have the support to do it. Because one of the reasons that I was able to do my MPH, I said to myself, okay, I need to make sure I have the resources. I spend time working. I also save the money, and doing those kind of things is really important. Planning ahead. If you have a plan, it acts like a safety net. So if you have a strong and concrete plan with many different avenues of backup, for example, then I think that should make you feel comfortable enough to take that leap, to do what you want to do. So definitely have a plan and be sure of what you want to do as well. I mean, you don't have to be sure like, okay, I need to know my career. I need to have it figured out by 30. I mean, I'm 32 now. I still haven't got it fully figured out yet. So you have to be open to that you can always change your mind. You can always evolve as a person. You can always have something else that you want to do instead. But at least if you want to take that leap, have a plan so that you have something to fall back on.
Have a plan. You have something to fall back on. I think with many of the themes that I've with my guests is there's something unique that I've always identified with the people I want to interview is somebody trusting in yourself and believing in yourself. And I think I always tell people you have to be your number one fan. You got to be the first person every day because you're going to spend all your life with yourself. You have to trust yourself. You have to have a plan. So I'll say this before we wrap up. I want to ask you, okay, there's an issue that you've been doing with the Sudan, with the support of the migrants coming back. Can you briefly share with us how you got involved and what you guys are doing and how people can support that?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. So 2023 broke out in Sudan, and it's something that I think many people could have predicted. I don't think, reflecting on maybe almost 9 months from it, I don't think I can envision that it would have been the way it is now. But conflict broke out, and then one of my colleagues actually in Juba, he waited, he gave it some time, but then we realized the need for people to come out was very, very serious. I mean, even on my end here in the UK, we had phone calls and people saying they need to come out. We realized there were issues with the dollar, so it was really difficult to send out money. It was really difficult for people to receive money. It was very difficult for people to get transport because the cost of everything just went up all the way. So my colleague Akach Manim in Juba from Citizen School, for the evacuation of South Sudanese from Sudan, he said, I want to do this. I want to have this initiative of, not even an initiative, it was just kind of like, I have this goal and this is the aim. He ended up hiring trucks. And one of the first trucks that was actually donated by my mother's business.
Okay.
She donated a truck. And then she got Tonj business community together. They donated trucks. And so more and more people started donating trucks in late April, early May. And so from that came the Citizen School. People were able to leave Khartoum through rank thanks to these trucks. So I think initially it was 3 trucks taking people, and that was around 200 to 250 people per truck. So it was a really, really intense moment, but it really built up to eventually being 10 plus trucks, around 6,000 to 7,000 people evacuated, people being airlifted, especially those who had urgent medical needs, people being airlifted through another charity who was also partnering, food items. Just so much has happened since, and so much incredible work has been done by Citizen School. So my role with Citizen School has pretty much been remote. I mean, there's a GoFundMe, that information I can share, but I've been trying to raise money. So by sharing the GoFundMe, especially like in the early few months of the crisis, we had a lot of support from diaspora, but also Sudanese people were very, very supportive, and especially on X. They would always amplify anything to do with the evacuation of South Sudanese from Sudan. We also did some media appearances. So I think I did an interview with New Humanitarian magazine. Akaj did some things with Spanish media, French media, and also BBC. So just really to get the word out there. But it's something, there were challenges, there were times trucks were not allowed to pass, trucks were not allowed to leave. Some people could not have been saved, but I'm honestly proud of the effort that has been made because at least 6,000 to 7,000 lives have been saved through the initiative.
Everybody, you can find all that information. I'll share that on social media. Don't forget to support the Citizens Call. They've helped a lot of people coming from fleeing Sudan and helping them get home safely. And that's been a good effort. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to know, what is your final words of encouragement to our listeners who are passionate about creating positive change for their communities? How can they make a change? How would you encourage them? How should they go about it? Because many people might be confused. What do? I want to make a difference. How can I take that first step?
I think the most important thing, and I think it goes for everyone, not just someone who's just starting off activism now, but I think even for activists who are currently active, I think the most important thing is making sure that you're okay, making sure that you're well, not just physically, but also mentally, that you are within the right frame of mind, that you're taking care of yourself, that you're looking after yourself. Because one of the things about being an activist, it can be emotionally draining because you're focused on very emotive issues like peace building, maybe gender issues, maybe political issues, humanitarian issues. So it can be very draining. So the most important thing is you have to be in the right frame of mind and you have to have the energy to do it. If you want to start, it can start with a stroke of a pen. You can start writing things. You can start movements. I mean, there's many different movements that are active. There are organizations you can volunteer with. Especially within South Sudan, there's so many organizations, whether international or whether grassroots organizations. There's so many different local and national NGOs that you can volunteer with. They have a lot of calls for volunteerism. There's also community organizations that you can participate in. So all of these different avenues can really make you active, can allow you to build your advocacy skills, and also can allow you to interact with people and really find like, what are you passionate about and what do you want to focus on? But the most important thing, I would say, self-care first, and then exploring these different avenues in order for you to become the activist you want to be.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is Adhieu. Self-care first. Start with yourself. Because remember, when you are a better self, you make your community and your country better. Adhieu, thank you for your inspiring words, sharing your experiences with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on South Sudan and the world. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in to South Sudan and the world. Remember, together we can be agents of change in our communities and beyond. Until next time, you guys take care. Stay engaged.